My name is Sylvia Zenteno, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the Director of Educational Programs and Training here at It's On Us. And, well, not here, I mean, like actually just at home, but at It's On Us. And our mission is to combat college sexual assault by engaging everyone and changing campus culture by teaching prevention education, training the next generation of student organizers, and disseminating large-scale creative campaigns. In this time of really high stress and uncertainty during both the COVID-19 pandemic and what we are also calling the racial pandemic, we wanted to do something for students and survivors who are feeling an increased amount of isolation and anxiety. So we really want to ensure that all students and survivors know that we're not going anywhere. You are not alone, and we are still here with you, even though it's virtual. And so for this reason, we came together with End Rape on Campus to bring you what we called Zoom University, a self-care survivor series. And this is this virtual course collection of webinars, workshops, and much more for students and survivors. We've actually even thought about maybe doing like a podcast just to have another platform. So we are using our Zoom University platform and the Reclaim the Red Zone campaign that Kenyora will talk about with you in a second. So Kenyora, I will pass it on to you.
Thanks, Sylvia. So first, welcome everyone to our Zoom University panel. Again, my name is Kenyora Parham. I'm the Executive Director of End Rape on Campus, and our mission works to end campus sexual violence by providing direct support services for survivors in their communities, prevention through education, and policy reform on the campus, local, state, and federal levels. So as Sylvia mentioned, together with It's On Us, we are partnering with the Zoom University series. And we're also partnering with the Every Voice Coalition, which Nora will share more about, to bring awareness to the red zones. And for some of you who may be unfamiliar with what that is, it's a period of time between August and November where at least 50% of campus sexual violence occurs. And so through our Reclaim Red Zones campaign, it's an 11-week journey that focuses on a series of topics each week to share resources and vital information to help uplift the voices of those most marginalized and bring them to the center of the national discourse around sexual violence. So therefore, we've brought both Zoom University and Reclaim Red Zones together through each of the platforms to bring you this panel. So welcome, everyone. And Nora.
Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be here today. My name is Nora Gallo. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am one of the co-national directors of the Every Voice Coalition, which is a grassroots organization of students, survivors, young alums, and advocates working together to end campus sexual violence across the country, using legislative advocacy and grassroots organizing to be able to bring students and survivors' voices to the forefront when it comes to writing legislation that would protect and support survivors, and organizing together and advocating for our rights. Our goal is to be able to empower students and survivors with the skills to be able to advocate for their rights into laws. We believe that young people should be at the forefront of movements, especially students on campus. And I am so happy to be able to be gathered here today with so many people. You're muted.
Sorry, thank you.
Technology, here we go. Thank you. So as we get into the purpose of this, we just want to remind everyone that this is a safe and brave community space to express how this pandemic, both racially and health-wise, has been, and how it's affected your livelihood. That also includes your physical and mental health. So this is a space to learn from one another. And if it happens, especially, respectfully disagree, and that's okay. We want this to be a safe space for all LGBTQ survivors today and always.
Thanks so much, Kenyora, for that. We also want to provide a trigger warning for sexual violence. do not have to, for any participants, also for any panelists, you don't have to share anything that you don't feel comfortable sharing. And if you prefer to talk about the way a response made you feel or what you needed without saying your actual story, that's totally fine. And if you want to share your story, please make sure to give another trigger warning for anyone who is on this call, whether you do it as a panelist or in the chat. Please feel free to, oh, thank you so much, Nora. We have posted some resources into the chat in case anybody needs them. Please feel free to copy and paste. We'll also paste them again at the end of this conversation. If anyone needs to take a break at any point, please feel free to. We have allotted 90 minutes for this call, but we're hoping that it'll be closer to an hour. At the last 10-minute mark, we'll provide a notice and sort of segue into wrapping up the call. And again, like I said, post those resources. So this call will be recorded, and it's up to you to either keep your camera on or off. However, we do ask that you stay on mute unless you are talking.
Thank you, Sylvia. And as we mentioned, this is a community space, and we would love to have you all feel free to engage with us by sending in your questions in the chat. And if you don't want to ask them up front towards the entire community, feel free to send your questions to Sylvia, Nora, or myself. And we'll be sure to share those with the moderator and the panelists. And if we're able to, towards the end, we'll also open it up for more questions from you all. However, we're going to play that by ear just with timing. So with that said, I'll hand it to Nora.
Wonderful, thank you. So today we have been joined by a wonderful group to share and discuss the intersection of survivorship, LGBTQ+ identity, and other identities, as those intersecting identities have been disproportionately impacted by gender-based violence, recent Title IX rollbacks, COVID-19, all to learn what solutions and support we need in and for our community. So before I pass this on to your moderator for today, I want to be able to introduce the entire group joining us. The moderator will be Arden Warling, he, him, who has a BA in anthropology with a minor in women's and gender studies. He is currently a Master of Public Health student at the University of Texas-El Paso. For the past 2 years, Arden has been conducting research in the family and intimate partner violence experiences of LGBTQIA+ identifying individuals in the El Paso, Texas border region. He's particularly interested in social support networks, coping mechanisms, and documenting experiences of violence across the life cycle. Our panelists include MJ Smith, who uses the pronouns they, them, theirs, is a student at the University of Maine studying political science. MJ is a survivor, student leader, community advocate, and a change maker. They believe sexual violence conversations must be led by the LGBTQI+ and BIPOC voices, perspectives, and experiences, as sexual violence affects both communities at a disproportionately higher rate. MJ's hope is to push for the sexual violence movement to move forward with minoritized communities, taking up space and leading such a transnational personal issue for many of their community. This is why they joined the Every Voice Coalition, to take up space in a predominantly white, cis, and hetero movement, and to push for both BIPOC and LGBTQIA+ college students to lead the sexual violence movement. Andrew Nichols, he, him, is a co-state director for the Every Voice Coalition in New Mexico. He's a junior at New Mexico State, studying elementary education, and identifies as transmasculine and queer. Joel Estrada, he, they, is a student at University of Texas-El Paso. He served as the Rainbow Minor Initiative intern and inclusion intern, where he got a closer look at University of Texas-El Paso's LGBTQ programming and culture. And I will pass it off to Arden.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I have the great honor and privilege of being the moderator for this panel today. So I will go ahead and kick it off with our first question for our panelists. Thank you for your work and for being here. Can you all please tell us a little bit about yourselves and what brings you joy in this work?
Certainly. Hi, everybody. I want to go ahead and start off with this question. Again, my name is Joel Estrada, and as mentioned, I was the Rainbow Minor Initiative and Inclusion intern at my university. What brings me joy is being part of this work that we're doing today, for example, of representing our LGBTQ community in our different campuses and capacity, is creating that awareness that specifically for a border town we really don't have. And to me, that's something that all of us in our own capacity can do to create those safe spaces for those individuals that may not feel as safe, specifically in a culture where machismo is very prevalent, to be who they are.
I can go next real quick. Again, my name's MJ or Mateo, if you want to use that name as well. I use they, them pronouns. I identify as queer, gender nonconforming, and I think what really brings me joy is creating space and room for people like myself and other minoritized communities, as Nora said in my bio, to be centered in this work, because so often we are kind of neglected and left on the fringes.
To wrap up, again, my name is Andrew. My pronouns are he, him, his. I think what I found is there's so much love and healing found within community-centered and work like this. I got to meet MJ and Nora from across the country, and I feel like I've really gotten to know them through this work, and it's so empowering and incredible to see change like this.
Awesome. Thank you guys for sharing. For me, I think it's important that advocates are inclusive and representative of the people that we're advocating for. So I find a great deal of pride being able to research this very important topic in our own LGBTQ community surrounding gender-based violence, sexual assault, family violence, and things of that nature. And as you know, a gay person myself, I find a lot of pride being able to contribute back to my community. So that's me, and I appreciate all of your guys' feedback on this question. So now moving forward, since COVID-19 was announced and students were forced off of campus, and now that school is back in session, how has your educational experience been? For me, I can just start off and say it has been one heck of a ride learning how to navigate the online environment, having to transition all of our lives, all of my classes. I don't know about y'all's universities, but everything going virtually, it's been a little intense, a little isolating, but we persevere. And with that, I will pass it on to the panelists.
I can just start off by saying that I have never felt this safe while I've been a student at New Mexico State University. I do just want to give a quick trigger warning for negative interactions with police, but there is a university police officer that follows me around on campus and has been harassing me for a couple years. This is the first time that I've been a student where I haven't had any interactions with him, and I've been able to 100% focus on school for the first time. And it sucks that this is the circumstance, but I'm glad that I get to really take my education seriously now.
For me personally, having to move from COVID-19 isolation to just fully online education, it's been a different kind of experience, just because in a Hispanic household, you know, you have your younger sibling, and when you're the oldest one, you have to take care of them as well. So to me, that added that responsibility. But it did give me an opportunity to be more open around the house, specifically being more open with my mom and having that shared knowledge of my LGBTQ identity and what really means to be, you know, identifying as LGBTQ. For the educational experience, I do have to admit that it does create a disconnect with our campuses and universities. In my university, we do have, you know, our inclusion office, and we have like our Rainbow Minor Initiative, or we used to have a Rainbow Minor Initiative that kind of handles that LGBTQ programming, and it feels like there's a huge disconnect between seeing that LGBTQ representation on campus.
I think the conversation about, like, you know, like, it's been a huge transitional period, I think, for everyone, even like regardless of education or not. But when you're also coming from a place as a survivor, it feels like the world's kind of really off kilter lately, and it's hard to kind of find your 2 feet. I almost feel like a freshman sometimes all over again, because I feel like I have to re-navigate everything, and it is really challenging because there's no, interpersonal communication with other students in the classroom anymore. And, what did I miss? Like, if I miss something, I really miss it. And, and I think, coming from a place of like, struggling with trauma, I think it's really hard because you're kind of put in fight or flight mode ever since March when we went into this huge switch. And it's just so up in the air. And I think through Every Voice, like this summer, it really helped me find my 2 feet again, because I was able to actually, focus on something for a positive change within, the main educational system. And I think that's really been helpful a lot. But I think without those sorts of avenues and without, all of us here as panelists being like having our own avenues of advocacy outside of, struggling with COVID, it's really, really challenging. Yeah.
I want to thank you all for sharing these experiences that you've had during the pandemic. It has definitely been challenging for everybody in a variety of ways. And hopefully we can just continue to persevere and know that at some point there will be an end in sight, though that end is not there yet. I have faith that it will happen at some point. So our next question for the panelists is, with the new Title IX regulations having been released late spring, have you seen any reactions from your school on how they will address and ensure the right and protections of students are upheld or not?
Title IX is a very intricate conversation that's very student-led in my university. I think as far as Title IX being spoken from our university officials, that's something that has not been seen. And Adrian, maybe you could vouch for me on this. The University of UTEP sometimes neglects to have these conversations with students. And I think that's very important to analyze and see what our higher ed individuals that are supposed to be our safeguards for Title IX are doing with our students. When the changes started to go into regulation and when students were seeing the changes that were going to be created with Title IX, it created more of an uproar with the student population. I do want to commend my university for having students that are very proactive to kind of have this news be settled and thrown into our minds, and advocate to see, hey, and yell out in different voices, hey, we need you to address these things, and how are you going to do it so we keep things the same or keep our students safe so we don't have allegations from students coming in, specifically with a huge uproar that happened recently at our university. But the sad part is that those student voices sometimes are very silent within our university. And I think that's something that is not just here in El Paso. I think it's something very prevalent in most of Texas as well. But I'm pretty sure that a lot of you out there from different areas can say probably a little bit of the same. However, I do want to admit that my university has not spoken openly about the Title IX changes. And with education being more virtually, I feel that they could neglect that and not even include it in the new student orientation programming, or even mention it during new student orientation programming, like we did so before when I was an orientation leader. So that's just something that I've seen specifically here down in El Paso, but that is just one version. And I think it's very important to highlight that our university should be taking higher steps to make sure that people are aware of these changes and still ensure the safety of our students.
I know that New Mexico State University is infamous for not communicating. And the only thing that I've heard from the administration at all regarding Title IX was one retweet from May. They retweeted a tweet from the Know Your Nine account, and that's it.
Yeah, very similar to you, Andrew. I have not heard much on my campus about Title IX regulations, and I mean, they're normally very quiet when it comes to the Trump administration because my school is such a publicly funded school. But, yeah, there really hasn't been any kind of conversation. Not like that's not normal, but I think it also is due in part to the fact that they're so worried about COVID-19 that, in terms of like educational safety programming for, remain safe at a safe distance, wear a mask, those sorts of things. There's been no conversation about how people are falling through the cracks and there's no conversation about, sexual violence on campus anymore. And I think that's a huge oversight, but it's also pretty common for public institutions to be doing that, and we do know that. So
thank you all for giving us insights into sort of the structure of your universities in dealing with Title IX. To add on to what Joel was saying, our university recently had a case where it was reported, but it didn't go through the proper channels, and the students felt that their only resort was to take it to social media and start an awareness campaign about what had happened with them. I won't get into details about the case, but I think it's very important for universities to have open communication with students about what resources are available to them. Who is the Title IX coordinator? Who do you go to when these things happen? Because they do happen. And not informing our student populations is disempowering our student populations from self-advocating for their own experiences. So I do want to highlight that. It's super important for our universities to be in open communication with students about Title IX or any other resources that they have. And that leads us into our next question, particularly about the LGBTQ community. In what ways does your school support, uplift the LGBTQ community or not? And how could they improve?
I think I'm very fortunate because, the University of Maine is in the northernmost state in the United States, and it's very liberal here for the most part. And, we've been really fortunate to have like really inclusive housing across the campus, gender neutral bathrooms. There's a resource center that provides a lot of resources for like name change, where to go on, like find hormones, where to find, like doctors that will, like other, really important resources for all of us in the community. We've got an LGBTQ plus allies council that handles anything within the academic realm. And also a push for, gender neutrality in regards to Panhellenic societies and female-centric spaces. So it's been a huge, overturn in the past couple of years where we're kind of leaning away from binary systems of thinking at the University of Maine, which has been really, really good. But I think they could definitely improve in terms of remaining intersectional in the search for inclusivity. I think sometimes we think of inclusivity as bringing in almost like as a step program, you know what I mean? And it seems like the queer community, because we are so vocal and we have been historically, it's so much easier for us to like kind of come up first, and then we start to talk about, other marginalized identities like, like Black people on campus, indigenous perspectives, and like especially disabled voices. It feels like those communities, and especially like the intersections of those communities, are often forgot about sometimes, I think, at the University of Maine. And it just seems like white queer spaces take more importance, which can be really frustrating, I think.
First of all, I just wanted to say, I think I want to go to school where MJ goes. Second of all, NMSU is pretty good in terms of starting the conversation about intersectional queerness on campus. We do have the option for inclusive housing in the dorms. Usually not a lot of people opt for that. So it creates, for me, it created a pretty hostile situation because I was in the only inclusive dorm on the whole campus, and all of the RAs knew that. So that was a little iffy. There's a big push for more gender neutral bathrooms throughout campus. The only issue is that they're not all super accessible, it's so frustrating that's it's been a big fight, and it just hasn't really gotten better. But other than that, I think a big thing is that our LGBT programs is in one of the front rooms of the student union building, which doesn't seem like a lot, but just knowing that walking in and seeing, all these rainbows everywhere as an incoming freshman is really huge. And I really pride them for that, but I do wish that there was more of a push to actually making things better instead of just putting a Band-Aid on it by taking off bathroom signs and stuff.
Yes, I definitely agree with Andrew. I would love to go to school where MJ is because that's just amazing. I guess just to put in perspective what it's like a little bit, being a student at a university that's in the part of Texas. Although El Paso is very liberal and very accepting of a lot of things, in the University of Texas-El Paso, it seems like we're backpedaling into a area where we don't have that representation on campus. As I mentioned in my bio, I was the Rainbow Minor Initiative intern and the inclusion intern. However, I was the last Rainbow Minor Initiative intern on the university campus. That position was actually removed from the inclusion office. So we no longer have this program that was created about 10 years ago that specifically catered to LGBTQ programming on campus. My experience also as the LGBTQ intern, or the Rainbow Minor, or RMI for short, was very different. I did have a lot of limitations when it came to my programming, when it came to trying to create, you know, more public programming where people could see what's going on, like National Day of Silence, like Trans Day of Visibility, like creating those programs specifically were kind of limited to what they wanted to see and not what we needed to see as representation. And I think that just shows a little bit of how the university is taking backtrack on what the inclusion office used to be. I was transitioned to the inclusion intern. So basically we were pushed into having all of our inclusive programming be pushed into one office. And that included, you know, like MG mentioned, you know, like our Black brothers and sisters, our Indigenous individuals, our all of these different intersecting minorities on campus were just shoved into one office that's supposed to cater enough for those individuals. However, that's not possible. And even with our Black Student Union and our Queer Student Alliance being present on campus, I do feel it is very tone deaf from our Student Engagement Leadership Center, which is the office that handles those organizations, to not provide that support for those students. I think it's something that should be addressed from the university a little bit, that our university is kind of backtracking when it comes to being more inclusive. Although we do have those programming that specifically are of LGBTQ, I guess, nature in their eyes. Like, for example, they have one tomorrow about pronouns. Coming from personal experience, we did have a lot of limitations of what that programming could be. And I think UTEP has kind of failed on having that representation and just kind of stripping the identity of having something that was created by not even them as a department in the Student Engagement Leadership Center, but by another department, and being taken in and kind of been destroyed from the ground up. Just kind of shows how we're kind of backpedaling into not having that representation on campus like we did 10 years ago.
I think also academically at UTEP, there is some limited opportunity for education on LGBTQ issues, but they generally are part of another course, generally a human sexuality course, either in psychology or health sciences. But our women's studies program actually does have a queer theory course that you can take online and a queer cinema course that you can also take online. But I think both of those courses could be improved a little bit. And I also think we need more academic programming to be inclusive. And, you know, sexual education courses aren't mandatory classes. You take them as an elective, as part of your prescribed major or degree plan. So I think maybe moving forward, having something that's mandated that provides inclusive sexual education could be important on university campuses. Though living in Texas, I don't see that, you know, coming in the near future, but it's something we could push for, something we can strive for. And so continuing our conversation on available resources, the next question is, in what ways does your school support students who have experienced gender-based violence or sexual assault? And what resources do they have available during the COVID-19 pandemic? And then also, it's a long question. Do you feel that these resources are inclusive to LGBTQ identifying people?
I'll go ahead and start on this one. As we mentioned, as Adrian and I as we kind of mentioned, we did have an incident where one of our university students and one of my personal friends did have to go through a traumatic experience that was mishandled by the university. And it was reported into the wrong channels where it just kind of got out of hand. And it should have been addressed at the beginning when it did happen. And I think that's a little bit of what our universities kind of handling these allegations. Of course, we do have our standard, like, you know, student conduct office, and we have our standard Title IX office. And, you know, we have the limitations and regulations of our UTEP PD as well. But a lot of the times it does feel like our university is very tone deaf. I mean, going back to the last question, it sounded like we had an inclusion department when really it wasn't even a department itself. So that's kind of like already a little bit of a backtrack where our university is kind of focused on a lot of its education programs, but not supporting those educational needs for our students, or not supporting those personal needs for what student affairs individuals should be doing to help our students navigate through these important conversations. I think also, as far as being open to our students, shoving in, Oscar and shoving in our Title IX office in like a quick slide in our university's orientation does not fully give the students a resource to know what it is at the beginning of the university. We don't have open tabling. We don't have anything that constantly reminds students, if you see this on campus, please report it. We have our Green Dot initiative, which is great to help students, say that we're not alone. But it's gotten to the point where students trusting each other more as students, individuals, to help each other out through these crises, than instead of going to our university officials and reporting these crises, which is why our last incident or major incident was handled so openly on social media, because students were tired of not having that representation on campus, or not having that specific resource to go to, or even having that resource and failing them to do anything, or even to help them in the correct channels. And I think that's something that should be addressed in the universities. I think that, when we have a lot of students popping up now where there's all these allegations that were hidden in the back because they weren't brave enough to speak up, now it's the time for the university to step up on doing what they need to be doing to help these students and enforce that these are resources that are accepted. But to be honest, my university does not do that fully, or at their full capacity to what they should be doing.
Yeah, I really want to echo that. The fact that I can't sit here and name resources off the top of my head, I think really, really shows how great my university is with things like this.
Yeah, I definitely, I agree. I think in terms of the University of Maine, they, it's kind of shady, their little system that they have going on, and I will be frank about that. A lot of people at the university, whether it's faculty, staff, student club presidents, we're all mandated reporters. So it makes it very isolating for people to feel like they can talk to people without, that power being shifted and their autonomy being taken from them, because then, anybody could just share that with Title IX, and then their choice wouldn't be a choice anymore. And the university does that regularly. And I mean, I won't sit here and talk about, every single little thing that the university does wrong, but I will say that they don't do a lot right. And, like you said, Andrew, I can't name resources on campus for people who come forward besides Title IX. And I think that's a really large problem, because not everyone does want to go through that avenue. And we can't necessarily find counselors because our mental health system at our university is very underfunded. So again, we don't have an avenue through that to go speak to someone. And it's just very challenging. And I think, especially for the last part of the question, which relates to, LGBTQ identifying people, naturally, because we are affected higher at disproportionate rates, we are going to be the group that, we need to talk about this issue. And yet there are no avenues for us, because even in my, it's called the Rainbow Resource Center at the University of Maine, everyone in there is a mandated reporter. So how can we naturally talk about this as a community issue when we don't have anybody that we can comfortably talk about that with without, facing repercussions?
Thank you guys for sharing your responses. I do think it's important for us to call on all of our universities and organizations to provide open communication about what resources are available. I know at my university, we have some resources. We have the Care Center, we have the Office of Student Conduct, Title IX coordinator, a pretty well-staffed counseling center, but I don't necessarily know if these programs are LGBTQ friendly or inclusive. It's kind of just, who are you talking to that day? But I think just general knowledge about the resources available needs to be pushed by universities, because this is not a problem that we can ignore or brush under the rug. You know, people are suffering, people are being victimized by these experiences, people are surviving these experiences every day. So having the ability to communicate with students that there are resources available to you is really important. So I hope that you guys, maybe you guys can go and look into your universities and maybe you be the ones advocating on behalf of your fellow students. So following this line of questioning about LGBTQ inclusive spaces in accessing services, how safe, comfortable, and supported would you feel reporting gender-based violence or sexual assault as an LGBTQ person in your community and on your campus?
I can start real quick. To say shortly, incredibly unsafe and incredibly uncomfortable. Trigger warning, I'm going to go a little bit into detail about my experience with university police, so please take space for yourself if you need. But in my freshman year, when I was living in the dorms, there was a party in the suite behind mine, and the cops knocked on my door, and I opened the door, and the first thing he says to me is like, you smoking dope in here? And he walks in and goes through all my stuff. He needed to see my driver's license, and at that point in time, my name and my gender marker were not accurate with what was on my student ID. And so he asked me about it, and he was like, oh, what is this name? And I was like, well, that's my dead name, like blah, blah, blah. And he said, and I quote, huh, that's ridiculous. Like, Andrew is nothing like the name on this. Why would you pick that? And proceeded to misgender me and dead name me. It was a couple months after this when he started just pulling me over on campus when I was driving to class or driving into the parking lot of the dorm that I lived in. That was my home. He almost arrested me a handful of times. It was really bad. And so my friends encouraged me to go to the Title IX office to report this. And so I went, and we had a first meeting, and it went really well. And I went back and we watched the body cam footage and listened to the 911 calls. And all of the times where he used the wrong name and misgendered me, the audio was cut out. You could see my reactions, and so it was there, but it was definitely tampered with. And so because of this, they asked if I had any witnesses. And so two of my best friends and the people that were there that night, I told them I really need you to do this for me. Please do this for me. And they both slept through their alarms and didn't go in. So they dropped my case, and there is nothing, absolutely nothing I can do about it now. This university officer is still employed at NMSU. If there are any NMSU students on this call, we can DM and I can let you know who this is. But yeah, just to say, I do not trust our Title IX office. Even with hard evidence, they felt that there's nothing that they could do, and they closed my case without telling me. So that's an issue that I really hope to address with other irritated students on my campus.
Andrew, I am so sorry that happened to you. That's unbelievable, but it's also sad that it's not unbelievable at the same time, that a Title IX office would do that, or police, but that is a separate matter. But I also kind of concur with you about, it's really hard feeling safe and comfortable and supported on campus where there are a total lack of resources, but what it comes down to, it's really a total lack of respect. It's a complete violation of our respect because they don't understand and they don't want to try and understand because they're so focused on optics too. And so, I mean, speaking from my own experiences at my university, I was a club president of my Queer Straight Alliance for about 2 years. And, I've heard a lot of stories about instances of, classroom violations from professors where they're misgendered, their dead name is used and also shared with the entire class as a joke. And, if students are to come forward, Title IX offices kind of look at them and go, well, what do you want us to really do? You know what I mean? Be your own self-advocate. Why can't you be your own advocate in this case? It seems like you should fight for it, you know what I mean? And it's almost like, especially for survivors coming forward with these instances of disrespect, utter disrespect, it's almost like there's this air of, well, you chose to be queer. You chose this almost sort of dramatic life already. So are you making this up? And it starts to completely second guess your identity, your experiences, your perspective. So I don't know about you, but I feel incredibly bitter sometimes towards the institution because it is an institution. It's a business. It's not there to support their students a lot of the times, at least 85% of the times. So my answer for this question is completely uncomfortable, unsafe, and unsupported largely. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so sorry that happened to you, Andrew, being very close to home. I think it's straight across the board. I think we all kind of feel unsafe to even report these incidents on campus. And honestly, I think you kind of multiply a little bit when you're in a border city, because even if you go outside of our university and campus and you analyze our LGBTQ community itself, like it's itself is also very toxic and very unsafe for individuals. I think you hit something very important, MJ, when you talked about, it's not just a violation of your safety, but it's a violation of your respect as well. And I think that's very important, and I think that's something that should be highlighted here in our border town. Just because I've met individuals even within our LGBTQ community that to see, like, just getting your pronouns correct as something that they're like, well, why should I care? It's like, well, it's not about you caring, it's about you just respecting that decision. There's like, and even it baffles me because we're Hispanic, like we are taught to be respectful to people, but just because this infringes you, you don't want to be respectful anymore. Like this is something very important, like and it shows a little bit when you transfer from just our community into the university. Like it doesn't feel safe or it doesn't feel good to not feel open about incidents that may happen within yourself. And that's again, it goes back to how our university handles these situations, and it's proven time and time again that why should students feel safe to report these things if nothing is going to happen? And that's why there's such an uproar currently in our university campus with all these incidents that we're not reporting because students are fed up about it. But even here, like nowadays, like in my university, I wouldn't feel safe if I was mistreated by a professor. I wouldn't feel safe if I was, called out for being gay in front of a classroom. I wouldn't feel safe to do any of that, because what is the university really going to do? Because they have proven time and time again that they truthfully don't care or don't even want to put attention to this matter.
Okay, my computer didn't want to unmute for a second. For your very powerful responses to this question, and it made me think, how do you think people in general?
Was that just my computer, or was that difficult to hear?
That was also my
Okay.
Yeah, do you mind repeating the question?
Yeah, sorry, sometimes my internet goes a little crazy. I just wanted to know, how could universities improve on their treatment of LGBTQ people? What kind of trainings of actions do you think should be instilled in university culture to be?
Again, I'm so sorry. I think that there might have been a bit of a Wi-Fi connectivity issue. If it's okay with you, Adrian, I can read the question.
Well, it wasn't like one of the pre-questions we have. It was just a follow-up to the last question.
Okay, then please go. Yeah, sorry. Please go ahead.
That's okay. Can you guys hear me now better? Okay, so how can universities become more inclusive to LGBTQ identities to help prevent these types of experiences from happening to anybody else?
I think it starts at employing queer people. I I'm sure I've had LGBT like professors in the past, but I don't know. And I think that just says something about the tone of the university, that, you know, these people that work for this institution, like, they can't be out because they don't know what could happen to their, you know, their position. And I would also love to see more interaction between the university and like high schools in Las Cruces, New Mexico, to create, you know, widespread queer community with young people. But going back, like, I really think it starts at employing queer people and really celebrating that and not tokenizing them.
Yeah, I have to agree. Definitely hiring queer people is something that's very important and occupying, you know, a little bit of those spaces. I am aware that at our university, well, me myself, I am employed by my university, so that's already a start, and even like higher education professors as well. But however, I do want to admit that our university does not highlight the importance of sensitivity training. Our university is actually one of the few spaces that is not requiring offices to have sensitivity trainings or inclusion trainings as part of their HR requirements to at least, you know, if the person doesn't take anything away from it, at least they sit down and know that these things are something that the university does not support. At UTEP, it's not required. It's actually super optional for campus university or campus offices to choose whether or not they have inclusion or sensitivity training as part of something that they should be doing with their different departments. And that's already a start that universities could actually do to create a more inclusive space. I think something that when I was the RMI we were trying to really push for is creating those safe zone trainings that other universities do have and are required to take. However, that's, again, just because of the nature of a university, that's something that never happened, or something that is still probably way in the back burner because it's harder for them to think about being inclusive. I think it also has to do a lot with the culture that we're in. And I think it starts very much with the culture of our campus becoming a little bit more inclusive to individuals. Although our campus is very open and our campus is going through a major culture shift, I do think that our campuses should begin by helping students realize that they're a safe space within each other, and see that that is something that is needed to be created for higher educational professionals. Sorry, I have a very harsh lip sometimes. And I think that's at least the small step that they could do is create that safe space training, specifically if they know that they have that population on campus, and create that sensitivity training to not only highlight LGBTQ individuals, but to also highlight our Black communities, to highlight our Indigenous individuals. Because although we are a very Hispanic institution, not all of us are Hispanic. And that's something that's very forgotten at the university at times. Like, we are all different, and we need to see that in our campus.
Yeah, I know that I at Santa Monica College, and we're very progressive, and we make a big conscious effort to be that way. I know I'm myself involved in an LGBTQ advisory group. We do really push and advertise the safe zone trainings for everybody. We are opening up a Pride Center. It's like a little mini like student union for certain marginalized groups, including LGBTQ. We have events. Yeah, absolutely. We definitely hire. So I mean, we're not perfect, but we definitely are making a lot of effort and have been for quite some time to make it safe.
Thanks so much for that, Linda. Really appreciate. If anyone else has resources, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we're going to put together a list that we can share in the recap as well, and hold any questions until the end, please. Thanks. Back to you, Arden.
Okay, MJ, did you have anything to add to this, or?
Yeah, I think when it was you, Joel, who brought up culture, and I think you know, at the University of Maine, obviously the demographics here are going to be incredibly white. So and we've tried with the whole diversifying and inclusivity thing, and it just seems like, you know, a lot of it's led by like white queer people, when necessarily not everyone who is queer is going to be white at the University of Maine. And so it seems like it perpetuates this culture of queerness is a more white sort of thing than it is more acceptable to be, you know, queer in POC spaces. And so I think since we do have, you know, people who are of the LGBTQ identities, who are professors, who are staff, who are faculty, like actually quite a lot of people are, but I still feel like it comes down to culture. And I think there needs to be an open forum, at least at the University of Maine, about what the university from the top down could be doing to best support students and faculty who are of the LGBTQ community.
Awesome. Thank you guys for these recommendations. Hopefully this is something that we'll see to be more commonplace in university settings in the future, and not just universities, but in other institutions as well. So that leads me to another question kind of about the institution sharing on LGBTQ lives and experiences, and it has to do with the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court of the United States just confirmed a hearing underway. How do you feel Judge Amy Coney Barrett's potential confirmation will have an effect on students, survivors, and higher education as a whole?
I have so many thoughts about about this administration that it's really hard to just compartmentalize for that question. It's a really good question, but I think it's been a really big struggle lately not to feel this utter feeling of despair. You know what I mean? It feels like we've regressed so much in the last 4 years, where it's like, you know, the US was never perfect. We all know that. It's a complicated history of, you know, colonization, genocide in the United States. But especially in this era where it seems like the people are progressing at a much faster rate than our administrations of higher power in the US are, it almost creates this cultural disconnect. And I think I don't know, maybe it's because I study a lot of politics, but it's just a mess. And I think for myself, as someone who's queer and a survivor, it feels like, you know, we had really big political powerhouses like RBG, who again wasn't perfect, but at least was more aligned with what the people wanted for the United States. And it seems like, you know, if, you know, more things start to be rolled back because of Amy Coney Barrett, I think, you know, I have a lot of faith that we can organize, you know, and we can make change from a people level. And I think that's the only thing that we honestly can do. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that I'm terrified, absolutely and utterly terrified. This, like, just speaking on a completely personal level, like, not only does this affect my potential ability to access an abortion if I needed one, but also, will I always be able to access hormone replacement therapy? And what is that going to do for my health long term if something happens where I don't have access to it? And am I going to be able to have access to gender confirmation surgery if that's something that I want down the line? To what other extent will my rights and liberties as a trans person be smashed, you know? And there's no way of knowing. And I think that frightens me so much. But like MJ said, you know, this is all on a people to, you know, person to person level. And I think we have so much power in numbers, and survivors have a lot of power in numbers too.
So something that we talked about last year at Know Your Nine was the importance of advocating at a state level and a local level. So even though there may be these changes at the federal level, schools still have to respond to their state regulations and laws. So I think especially being a state that has good gender identity discrimination protections, it really speaks to the importance of making sure that students are aware and knowing how to report to the state versus rather than reporting to the education department like before.
Thank you. Joel, did you have anything to add or?
No, same with my two colleagues, basically.
Okay. I really echo that fear of the unknown, right? Like, who knows? Are they going to roll back marriage? We don't, I guess we have to wait and see how this progresses. So with that, for our panelists, we bring us to our last question for the day, unless anybody else wants to ask a question in the chat, and maybe we can squeeze that in. But as the fight to end campus sexual assault continues, what can the movement do better to end gender-based violence in the LGBTQ community?
I think it goes back a lot to its education. Um, I sincerely believe that education is not about, you know, just learning what 2 + 2 is, or that education is just learning how to be a respectful human being. And that's something that even my mother has taught me since I was little. You can be the smartest person, but if you don't have the education to know how to be respectful in public or how to be respectful to your fellow peers, then you're not educated at all. I think something that's very prevalent in the LGBTQ community is the power imbalance of older individuals towards younger individuals. I think we see this very much where not only is it sometimes fetishized that, you know, an older man, specifically talking from my experience as a male in the community, an older man hitting on a younger man is very acceptable, very open, and regardless of whatever's happening, it's the younger individual's fault for following that older persona or trying to be like that older persona that is, you know, hitting on them, or you know, again, from my perspective, being very open to them. I think that's something that's, you know, very prevalent, because you see a lot of these incidents where these younger males or younger gay males or male loving males see where they kind of have to go through their first experiences of what it feels to be in the community, end up getting hurt by these older generations that were taught different and were taught under a different umbrella in different terms. Because although we are very rich in our history and we respect our elders that fought for us, some of those individuals are just trickling in that are kind of like just disrespecting the younger generation, and, you know, kind of corrupting them to where, like, it used to be like this before to me, so why am I not going to do the same thing to you? So to me, I think something we can do in the LGBTQ community is, one, use our power as a younger generation, or more awoke generation, to be more educated to those individuals and expanding it to our community, and also being that safe space for the the individuals that are still closeted, that are still not okay with being LGBTQ. It's about just being educated. I really want to reinforce that, is that to everybody on this panel is, and everybody in this conversation right now, that it's about being educated. And it's about using your power of what you know to spread it to those around you and be in that safe space if you're brave enough to do so. And even if you're not, you know that you're still a beacon for even those individuals that are not openly LGBTQ like ourselves.
It sounds very simple, but honestly, just believe us. I cannot stress that enough. But it's really just that simple. I think when you start perpetuating this idea that, you know, we have to constantly explain ourselves in this society, we start listening to people's stories and experiences, and we start to disrespect them in a lot of different ways. And I think from my own experience at, you know, university, or just like through interpersonal relationships, there's always it always seems like you need to have like some long story, you know what I mean, or you just need something. And I think when people just start believing others and start believing at face value and start to create this society built on respect again, I think we would have gone very far. Yeah, and our society does need empathy as well. I think those kind of go hand in hand, respect and empathy.
Yeah, and to close out with that, I think the big thing is acknowledging toxic masculinity and calling it out when we see it. And I know that that's a phrase that's really thrown around a lot. But I know as a trans man, I know that in the start of my journey, I definitely looked up to other men to see, like, this is what my gender has to be. You know, I have to see women as these objects, and I have to, you know, hold doors open for everyone and not let them go through, like, you know, and I think it's our job to call that out when we see it and to hold our queer siblings accountable to that, so we can set the example, especially for our younger trans masc folks.
Thank you guys for those responses. I do think that's all important work. We need to be more accepting. We need to believe survivors. We need to quit the toxicity within our own culture. We need to address toxic masculinity. For me, I think just having continued experiences like this, where we open it up to people to share their experiences and to talk about their lives as LGBTQ people, and to come together and share about, you know, abuses that we have suffered, or assaults that we have gone through, or just things that make us feel unsafe, and coming together to collectively see, like, how can we deal with this as a society when the rest of society isn't necessarily keen on helping us. So I really appreciate having this panel today. I appreciate this discussion. We do have a question from the chat that I would like to ask, but as we come to a close, I want to say, if you need to step out or it's over your time, you have other commitments, feel free to, you know, go about your business, but we would invite and welcome you to stay with us to continue this conversation, at least for this one last question. So for our panelists from Sorefa, and I'm sorry if I did not pronounce that correctly, how do we harness the power of grassroots and word of mouth to raise awareness about non-university resources, so resources in the larger community?
I'll say the same thing that I tell the volunteers that I work with at Every Voice in New Mexico. The power of social media is unmatched. We're all in our houses or working from home in our home offices and all those things, constantly scrolling to fill the time between Zoom meetings. And I make a commitment to make sure that every single person that follows me will see something from me every day regarding sexual violence or anything, regardless of if they like it or not, because it's so important. And I love social media. I hate it, but I also love the power that it has.
Yeah, I have to echo that 100%. I think as a very virtual community now, it really is hard to see the power of these virtual spaces to kind of like create that same awareness of like the smaller resources that we have on our greater community. Definitely social media is a very powerful tool. I think social media is a double-edged sword as well. You know, you could use it to hurt someone, but you could also use it to empower a lot of people. I mean, simply, I've gotten like some messages because I share a lot of Sailor Moon wisdom, which is like basically just affirmations for your day from people that see those and feel better. So using the same cloth, you know, using research, plugging in resources about, hey, well, just a reminder that the BRC, for example, here in El Paso, like the Borderline Rainbow Center is doing this today or is doing this tomorrow. All these little tags could lead to, you know, a little bit of awareness, and simply occupying your spaces again. Occupying a space is a very powerful tool as well. If you know that you're somewhere where maybe people don't know what these resources are, or somewhere where you have a feeling that it might be very important to share these resources, is using your power as the occupier of that space to kind of mention these resources. Everybody in my friend group knows that the Borderline Rainbow Center exists for a reason here in El Paso. And with that, you know, you have like 10 people, and then those 10 people go out into like the rest of their spaces, and then they share it, and so on and so forth. When you create this little chain that, you know, it takes time to see sometimes, but at least you're getting that small piece of information that you need to get out little by little.
Yeah, I would definitely say that social media is one heck of a tool to be utilizing in this new digital age. And I definitely see the effects it has on, like, you know, younger generations, but also more importantly, older generations. I find that like Instagram pages like So You Want to Talk About, and then there's just resources upon resources about, you know, they can find out what it means to be, you know, like the Amy Coney Barrett thing. And I don't know, it just seems like there's so many things that are educational tools now on social media, even with TikTok. And I think that's kind of a beautiful thing, that we can all just kind of have our little outlets on social media, and then we can collectively empower communities to act, and we can spread knowledge about there's a protest happening tomorrow, wear a mask. And I think, it's really cool that we have those things, but it also comes down to just simple representation. Speaking for myself, being completely out and never having like a really big period where I wasn't out, and constantly being that very vocal person in every classroom, every space, and just being like, hi, I'm here, I'm super queer, and I'm here, and you're gonna listen to me because I'm not gonna shut up. And I think and having those people in those spaces really creates a domino effect of acceptance, because it starts to normalize it in our culture, because we are here, we're not going anywhere. And I think people need to be consistently reminded of that.
One more thing that I want to add, if that's okay. I think a really foundational part of this is like critical connections, actually building the relationships with the people around you that you want to mobilize, or want to encourage to mobilize, and taking it past the surface level, hey, can we do this? And actually being like, this affects you and I, like, let's do this together, and let's take this on and support each other the whole way. That goes a lot farther than, just hey, hop onto this call and we'll figure stuff out.
So I think an important slogan I'm going to carry with me is a combination of occupy space, build relationships, and never shut up. I think that's some very key, valuable lessons that we can take away from this. And so I don't see any more questions coming in from the chat. So I just want to thank you guys for allowing me to moderate this panel today. It was a great experience. I thank you all for your time, your answers, and for all of you coming to participate. And I'm going to pass it on to Sylvia for our closing.
Thank you so much to such an amazing group. We are really lucky to have you here. Thank you for what was a really great and very informative conversation. I do want to draw attention to the fact that these conversations will be what leads to the real change that is needed in this movement and in this country. So thank you to everyone who joined as well. We are really lucky to have you in this movement. I also want to say a big thank you to Nora at Every Voice Coalition and to Kenyora at EROC for making the discussion possible. Please feel free to, we're about to paste those resources we mentioned earlier in the chat. We are hoping that this can be a space that is safe and we can come back to it in community many times and whenever we need to. So please look out for any other ZoomU events that are coming your way, any other Reclaim the Red Zone campaigns that are coming as well. And oh, thank you for posting the link. And again, thank you so much to our panelists and our amazing moderator. The work that you do is going to change the world, and I can't say thank you enough. So thank you all.